Good evening, everybody. System Chalk here with the 10th episode of our first Book of Hours playthrough on YouTube. It's weird to call it the first one because obviously there's so much time in the beta, although to be honest, the beta I think I only ever really got up to... I could probably draw a line a little bit like this. Actually, no, we did get across this bridge, but like we never hit the nocturnal stuff. I don't think the dawn period was ever made available in the beta. And then I made it to the top of Hush House in the weeks just prior to release. But it's fair to say this is the first full playthrough. I suspect we will see the first ending probably on Twitch, but it's fun to try different perspectives. And again, it's really interesting to have these parallel runs going just because there's already differences in terms of, you know, whether or not people have been able to follow up on the affair of the forgivable debt along with other tasks. But when we left the last episode, we were working on a text. So we were reading What Does Not Bark, Alexander Props Writes Warily of Calyptra, a law, principle, or society which prevents the dissemination of dangerous knowledge. We also had a little bit more cataloging to do, but that will happen in another day. And I suppose I left my health open. We can use that most likely for cataloging, seeing as I don't have the ability to do any gardening. This is one thing I've always wondered about in terms of the game, like just for myself. So one nice feature which I have absolutely no way of being able to convey as part of a stream, but normally when I do these videos, what I'll do is I'll record a session, and then I'll start uploading it to YouTube while I record the other one. That's just, you know, a way you can leave it. The nice thing about it is just, number one, I don't need to have I'm not using my internet while I'm playing the game, but the other thing that's nice about it is that you don't have this big block of uploading that's happening at the end of the session. If I want, I get the option of sort of turning off the computer or putting it to sleep or something like that. And that's particularly valuable if you want to minimize the amount of time spent staring at screens all day. But one nice side effect of it is when you're tabbing out between episodes to do that sort of work, you know, the music is really nice, but on the day with the gale, I just had this nice sort of the sound of the wind as I was busy doing my work. So the piece that the game provides sort of has a few different forms. I've actually wound up, I think one of the things that strikes me about the sound design of the game, and I don't know if other people have experienced this, but I have on occasion, you know, if I'm doing a stream or something like that and host someone, I usually tab out of the game rather than quit it, and I actually wind up having the game sort of running in the background without sort of realizing it, just because it forms this nice background. It's just, it isn't too in your face. There are those moments where you sort of pull yourself out and you recognize it, but it never does so in the way that other games do. So it's something that it's already very nice, but I think for those little extra features that I only find through, you know, largely through coincidence, it's something that I've gained an even better appreciation of. Of course, sounding a little bit like a sales pitch right now, it's probably worth mentioning that I was given a key for this for promotional purposes. There is no perpetual edition to sell you on anymore, but boy, do I hope you give this a shot, because I think it is a really special game, and it is one I'm very happy to be able to share. So, let's let the day run by. So at this point, we're really just waiting to see if something exciting comes from Mrs. Kill. I can't really see that many... items. I suppose if we got a Memory of Storm somehow from Mrs. Kill, but I don't recall if I've ever gotten a Memory Storm from a character. I know I've gotten a Solace, but Solace gives heart instead of sky. Although I guess even if I got Solace, I could combine that with Furs and Feathers and the Astrolabe. So even then we would be able to make something of it. So anyways, where I'm mostly going with this is... Oh, actually... there's another possibility that we have now too. So I was a little reluctant to spend the half crown, but with Foresight I could use the health to hire Denzel, Denzel would allow me to open up this floor of the house. Now I suppose I should be a little careful on that because we can also access this through heart. So is there a floor that Denzel can access that... Yeah, so this is actually a pretty good one. So I do kind of want to watch my pennies, but I think we will hire Denzel for this. Well, let's see what the day brings. Mrs. Kill has seen more of the world than she usually lets on. Conversations with her yield the occasional surprise. I'll probably wind up hiring Denzel, but let's see if we get something exciting. I'm going to need to make sure that I leave a minute for... Well, it would not be a bad idea for me to leave a minute just for everything to get caught up, because you can only unlock one room at a time, but as long as I use Denzel before the end of the day, we'll be fine. Calyptra, like the planet that occludes the star, or the Doylean dog that fails to bark, can be identified only by its absence. Even the name, I think, must be a mask. Okay, so that's some winter aspect for me to think about. So that would be relevant here with Lady Ava's Repose. The problem is that there isn't any equivalent winter in my skills. There's some possibilities here, but I don't think we're quite at the point. It's better to focus on these texts. These are the ones that are easier to work with. All right. Similar story with the gossip. So I think you know, the radical measure. If we think about it, we've got Fet, which is 2. We've got gossip, so we can start with 4. You know, if we were to go somewhere. With the globe, you know, we can sort of get up to 5 there, but until we actually start getting some skills related to the aspects that we need, we're not really going to be able to get ambitious. It never hurts to just, like, one of the things I find valuable in sort of occasionally rechecking these texts to the side is that it keeps you in mind of some of the things that you can do if something special happens, like a storm. But in this case, it's going to be pretty ordinary. Alright, Calyptra is said to make exceptions specifically for the librarians of the Watchman's Tree. Does it make those exceptions so the Hours can make use of them? I'm always trying to remember the libraries of the Watchman's Tree, and I know the game mentions it in other places, but off the top of my head there's the Ostorium, which I actually found out about from the Locksmith's Dream, the live event. I believe that is actually one of the factions that you can join in that event. I think the Invisible Serapeum counts as one. It's the Invisible that always trips me up, because I know the Serapeum is a thing and was in the Library of Alexandria. And then Hush House, but I know there's more than just 3. So anyway, something for me to reflect on. Oh, this is helpful. Okay. And Edict's Inviolable, so that one we can lock in right away. All right, so I think this is actually going to upset the plan to work with Denzel. Again, the logic here is that technically I don't have the foresight anytime that I want, but I was kind of talking about how, you know, for these different areas, like, they're more about opening access to another place I can go. On their own, the Grand Descent doesn't really give me that much, particularly now where I'm trying to sort of build up my skills and build up my elements of the soul. So one nice thing to have with the element of the soul, and actually let's put that in on its own in its own home. We did have a couple of 4 sky texts. So we've got Stolen Reflections and the Perugian Diaries. So we add that with Furs and Feathers. We've basically got access to two sky texts whenever I want. So we will consider at the desk here, because it'll take scale. read Locksmith Stream first. So, The Locksmith Stream, Stolen Reflections. The fourth volume of Teresa Gallagher's expansive work, no longer a discussion on the dreams of artisans, but a valuable survey of other works. The tone is calmer than that of Trespasses, but occasionally fearful, even paranoid. This volume was published in 1926, but almost immediately recalled and pulped by the publisher at the request of the author, or possibly the authorities, depending on which story you believe. A few copies survive. And we'll use a consider verb for the edicts inviolable. Use this lesson to acquire a new skill. So less reason for us to keep talking with Mrs. Kill. We always have the option of going back to the Sweet Bones, but given that we don't have that much more cash. One way I kind of like thinking about the choice of visiting the Sweet Bones is, you know, when you have... Okay, actually, again, this comes back to a playstyle thing, but it's a little bit like how you work in the real world. You're going to have sort of different stages of sort of your life and your relative abilities. So, like, one of the first jobs that I had was actually to make a website for a kind of a local charity. But the thing is that I actually got that done very quickly, and so afterwards I helped the charity. I actually got to basically be sort of a relief caseworker. I was really young to be doing that, but you know, I wasn't doing anything that would, you know, they were responsible about it, basically. Also, it's so far in the history, I'm sure if I were to say who it was, nobody could really get after them now. But you know, in this particular case here, the relief part is really important, right? It's like when you're overwhelmed, you try and put some of the overflow towards someone, and of course you direct the cases, which are really just about, you know, making sure that the forms get filled out properly and the work is done properly, right? And, you know, trying to do an inventory for insurance purposes. You know, there's lots of different tasks that you can try and assign someone to. And then, of course, you know, when I'm in school or, you know, just trying to do like basic work, you know, you're doing what would largely be considered kind of low skill labor, right? You go concession at a movie theater, or, you know, serving coffee or something like that. And then, of course, you develop some skills. You go to university, or you build some work experience, or maybe you start your own company or that. But you sort of gain some abilities, and in this case, there's two ways that happens in the game. You gain new elements of the soul, or you become better in terms of your skills. Now, there's a few different reasons why your pay goes up as a result of that, but also the sorts of decisions that you make with your time will also change, because any given hour that you spend is much more valuable to you. And this is one, I don't want to spend too much time talking about streaming in that, but this is actually a really big dilemma that I have, because there's a lot of things that I want to do, and I don't want to try and imply that I'm some world-shaping, you know, genius that, you know, commands hundreds of dollars a minute in terms of his salary or something like that. But I do have like a grown-up job, which does involve some degree of skill. And so in theory, you know, an hour of that time can actually be spent towards more lucrative activities than playing video games on the internet, as much as I enjoy doing that and as grateful as I am to have an audience. Please don't take that as being a, you know, I'm too good for this nonsense statement. I guess the I'm too good for this nonsense statement is when the stream just suddenly vanishes one day without a trace. But, you know, I think everybody kind of has some, you know, regardless of where you are sort of in your working life, I think everybody has roughly an intuition in terms of how this happens, right? And I kind of feel that the same applies to Book of Hours, where, you know, if you don't have a whole lot in terms of skills, or you don't have a whole lot in terms of elements of the soul, you know, yes, you can spend the time, you know, going to the Sweet Bones, you can renew an element of the soul, and maybe you'll get to catalog another book. But the likelihood of that book being something that you're going to be able to read and work on is very low. So is it really all that more costly for you to wait the next day? Usually not. Whereas if you have a lot of skills, if you have a lot that you can do in the game, you know, all of a sudden you may actually want to get that element of the soul again, because it might mean the difference between being able to capitalize on the weather, or it might mean that you're able to get that book done faster, or maybe, you know, you think you're worried that Numa's going to show up, and so if you can get that persistent memory locked in a lot faster, all of a sudden that money that you spend is money well spent. And oddly enough, again, I don't think the game's trying to make a comment in terms of like how we work or anything like that, but it does actually kind of line up a little bit with, it does line up a little bit in terms of the example in terms of working life that I'm talking about. We don't have a whole lot of money right now. Time is not really, like, time is the one thing we have in abundance, and we don't really need to spend to make more of it, and that's good because we don't have a whole lot of money. When we have a lot of capabilities and when we are sort of stretched in every direction to try and get everything done in time, that's going to be when we have a bit more money and we can do these sorts of things. So that's generally how I sort of think about this current state. It may not be the right way to think about it. Like, it could be that there are a couple of things that maybe I would be better, suited to. Sorry, for some reason I took leave of my senses and almost didn't go to the Motley Tower 3rd floor. I may turn around and decide, okay, here's a better way of spending the early days. But in the end, if I catalog a book a little bit later, well, no big deal, because in the end, it's like, if you think about it, it's not like we didn't wind up reading a book today. And as it happens, I have the option of reading another book tomorrow if I so choose, or maybe I'll just go and decide to catalog these texts instead. And more importantly, we didn't wind up using the Gale to read a book, which turned out to be one that we could do through our own uses. So again, this is one of these cases where, a little bit like when you're not earning a whole lot of money, well, it makes a whole lot of sense to go to school and build up those skills, as opposed to, when you have a whole lot of valuable skills, and maybe at that point you want to go to the workshop. This is probably not a good place to talk about career things. I'm sure other people have more satisfying careers than mine, but I think the point stands. All right, Motley Tower, the 3rd floor. The theoplasmic miasma that hung around the room below is a little stronger here and a little different, with a rotten, musky scent that suggests a decaying reptile house. Perhaps something layered here after the inhabitants departed. Perhaps the inhabitants dreamed unwisely. In any case, the right counter-influences will dispel it. Oops, I meant to read whatever text was there, but edicts inviolable, the precepts of occlusion and dissolution. Their jealous enforcement is the nature of Calyptra. So this is a Horomachistry and preservation. So I note that Desires and Dissolutions also has Horomachistry, of course. This one is not competing with Bosk, and Desires and Dissolution sort of feels like the sort of thing you might want to lock into Bosk, but let's just see what it gets us. So that's a metal, so that's rather tempting. And then if we put that under preservation, that gets us a core, which we already have. So metal is tempting, especially because of what it gives us with Denzel. Let's read the text. So, fire. The mare in the tree is not the youngest hour, but she is the youngest hour of Calyptra, for she has been born many times in many places. The red flower on the watchman's tree is the fire fueled by truth, and without it the tree would fall, as all Horomachists know. And under preservation, night. The velvet is not the oldest hour, but she is the oldest hour of Calyptra. The black flower on the watchman's tree is the preservation of secrets, and without it the tree would fall. This is a matter of preservation. So this is actually this does feel like a little bit of a dilemma here for me. I'm probably going to wind up committing edicts inviolable to Horomachistry, but I might hold off until I know that I need the forge. And the reason why I say there's a little bit of a dilemma here, I'm going to click on the nature of the wisdoms. So preservation, healing, restoration, renewal. I believe it's the same text, no matter how far you go up. And then Horomachistry, the bright arts dealing with the laws and contentions of the hours and their names. So this is one of the reasons why I find the Tree of Wisdoms a little bit more interesting than I think I think people find it interesting, but I think it's more interesting than it necessarily gets credit for. And this is just talking about it's already a high level and it's even higher. So we have, again, two contradictory descriptions. One that's talking about the velvet and one that's talking about the mare in the tree. Now, I believe the mare in the tree, or wait a minute, the mare in the tree, I might be thinking about the apple bright. Sorry, I just got a mess. I'll deal with that in a second. But yeah, where I was going with this is that I'm pretty sure the mare in the tree is one of the gods from nowhere, which are rather sinister, and I generally don't feel comfortable with them. And so this is kind of where it becomes. This is where it becomes really hard for me to commit things in the Tree of Wisdom. There will be another time when I get to commit something into Horamakastry, and that might get me a medal, or I might be able to get the medal somewhere else. So again, we say, the mare in the tree is not the youngest hour, but she is the youngest hour of Calyptra, for she has been born many times in many places. The red flower on the watchman's tree is the fire fueled by truth, and without it the tree would fall, as all Horamakasts know. And again, we compare, the velvet is not the oldest hour, but she is the oldest hour of Calyptra. The black flower on the watchman's tree is the preservation of secrets, and without it the tree would fall. This is a matter of preservation. Now the velvet, I don't know too much. I'm trying to think how much I actually know about the... I'm actually trying to think if I know that much about the velvet, but I seem to remember the mare in the tree actually had a tarot card that was released when the priest came out, I think. But in any case, so where I'm going with this, right, is that I am associating, basically what's happening here if I commit this, I'm essentially committing a knowledge which associates the mare in the tree with Calyptra. And this... I guess the drawback here is I'm not 100% sure what this means overall in terms of the world, right? I do get an impression that part of what the librarian's job will be is to sort of help reconcile some of the contradictions between the histories and give advice to the hours. And so am I sort of enshrining a god from nowhere into this into this this entity Calyptra, where perhaps it would be better to have something like the velvet. This might actually wind up. This may wind up have something to do with the difference between birds and worms. So there's a couple of other things that I note. So it's not the first time I've seen references to black flowers and red flowers, but now I'm realizing that there's an association, at least in this case, with the red flower and one of the gods from nowhere compared to the black flower, which seems to be one of the more traditional hours. But again, what I always find so interesting here is that there are some of the descriptions here which, even though they give me something desirable, I do feel a bit uncomfortable committing them, just because I'm not quite sure what I think about the text. And for some people, this is going to seem like the stupidest reason not to commit something into the Tree of Wisdoms. And yet to me, this matters a lot, especially because it's one of these things which... Like, this is what horror stories are written about, right? The forbidden knowledge, messing with things you don't have a very good idea about. And so this can be a reason why I sometimes, like in the Twitch playthrough, I don't have a lot of skills in the Tree of Wisdoms, and that was just to kind of see what I could do without the elements of the soul. Here, I did start out saying that, yeah, you know, I would like to get the elements of the soul that are relevant. And yet in this particular case here, I'm like, yeah, but it's talking about the mare and the tree. Like, can I get my forge from somewhere else? You know, and again, we've got the examples here, pentaments and precursors. This one was a little bit easier for me because, you know, I already have a core and I already have an Arab. Weaving and not working, again, we've got health, we've got core. Resurgences and emergences was probably, this is sort of the one that I use as an example a lot. These ones don't have as much, I don't have as much that I'm worried about on this one because it's a difference between renewal and consumption, but it's also the gods from stone, which I believe are all dead except maybe one might have an ambiguous status. Again, it's a little tricky to go from memory on these things. One other example that I'll just take would be desires and dissolutions, and to compare the fact that we know we want to go down Bosk, but we do have Horomachistry as an option. So let's maybe see what we've got. So we've got above for Horomachistry and underneath for Bosk. So the recommended path, red the dawn and black the night, and white what's left. Above we see, beneath we know. Oh, that's interesting. And then above, what begins in light may end in flesh. Without distinction and perception, pleasure cannot be distinguished from pain. These traditions are Horomachistry. So again, this is considerably less sinister than a reference to the mare and the tree that you know, may wind up being sort of a deal with the devil. So it always feels a little bad to, you know, to take so much time and not make a decision. But at least for me, because I care about this text, I'm not actually committing something, at least until I know that I need the forge. Because in the end, right now, the forge isn't going to get me something that I can't already access. Maybe a small exception in terms of something that I could access through Denzel, but you know, we have other ways of doing that. In fact, no, we still need an element of the soul to hire Denzel, so. Janus is the gatekeeper, the twin god, the god that wounds, the presager of changes, the sun, the moon. So we identify him with the watchman, the twins, with the mother, with the forge, with the menascate and the madrigad. He cannot be all of these, can he? The Flamines knew the church, knew the dry land, knew Elagabalus. Is he then synthesis, or is he something else? In Gallicaea they called him Ianius Lamius, but the Obliviots are notorious for their slanders. Right. While we're waiting for, well, we'll finish reading the text and then we'll see the result. 3 more books for us to work with, which is nice. Night has fallen, dawn will come soon. One thing I've been meaning to talk about, it won't be for today because we don't have that much time left, but there is some reading that I've been doing which it's adjacent to Cultist Simulator, and it's not really direct, so it winds up touching on some of the occult, but it wasn't the reason I started reading it. It just wound up being really influential for some of the people who'd sort of follow these things later, and it's actually, I think it's pure coincidence that I wound up looking at this around the time Book of Hours came out, but it did actually wind up giving me a perspective on this, and I wind up appreciating some of these texts a lot more. One of the examples of this, I've been reading some of Plotinus, and it's sometimes really interesting to read some of those ancient texts because you have really interesting lines like, as anyone can observe, the movements of the heavens wind up, influencing events on the earth. And he's not talking about the tides, I think it is actually specifically the Aeneid on being able to. I don't think it's specifically astrology, but again, it wasn't the thing I was looking for, but I remember catching that phrase. But it's kind of funny because obviously for me, reading that in the 21st century, I'm like, oh, is it so obvious? But to a certain extent, when you think of these texts, they have this similar perspective. Like, at least in the case of Book of Hours, these authors are describing something that is very real to them, and they're describing it in what might seem like a very matter-of-fact way among the intended audience, while to us, we're still trying to make sense of all of the detail. There was someone I was watching play this for the first time who was, they were trying to make a guess. It's like, it seems really interesting, but I'm trying to find out if these are all just random fragments or if there's an overall world to this. And of course, that's such a wonderful place. I almost kind of wish I could go back to that myself, because you have all of those discoveries ahead of you in terms of just the interesting, all of the interesting discoveries that you're going to make. Although I have I have plenty of things to learn, both in Book of Hours and Cultist Simulator still. But it is sometimes funny, especially to know that some of the later thinkers in antiquity were largely writing sort of commentaries on each other. So when you see things like Stolen Reflections, which sort of it's referred to as this sort of survey of other works, obviously there's other scholarly works which could be described in a similar way, but I always kind of find it fun to run into some of these texts and just to see, so-and-so's commentary on this work. And even inside a Book of Hours, you'll have these different texts where they say, he made this common mistake of perceiving, this thing when it actually should be that thing. But overall, it's still a helpful work. And I don't know, there's always something kind of fun about just those imperfections of the work, knowing that you have authors with their own biases and that's still coming across in terms of the text that they're giving you. And that just makes it fun. I mean, again, it's one of these things that builds a credible enough world that I can be worried enough about seeing a mention of the mare and the tree that I deny myself the advantage of getting something like metal. And it has very little to do with what I think most people would perceive as being an optimal playthrough, and yet to me, this is absolutely the reason I play these types of games, because it lets you sort of sit and think a bit about what's going on and how you stand in relation to these things, right? You can be the sorcerer's apprentice and sort of bring in, try and gain control of things that are beyond your abilities and hope that it turns out well. Or you can try and study and gain a better understanding and sort of shape this world in a meaningful way for yourself. Janus has, they say, not one face but two, to which I reply, why only one? Why only two? Herschelt and Coseley, according to Thomas Love Denman, once agreed that Janus was all the gods and none, but later Herschelt described him as all the gods and Coseley favored none. Denman was a sinister dilettante, but this rings true of them both. This wasn't the line I was specifically thinking of, but that's actually not a bad example here, right? Where it's like, yeah, this guy is probably a bit of a jackass, but what he's describing is true. It's true in terms of what I know about these people. So, anyways, this is going to be a hard one to remember for cataloging, but we'll stick that one off to the side. Actually, so I think this one was Storm. Confounding Parable, Intuition, Impulse, and for some reason I had this idea that has Fear, but we've never actually tested it. Alright, let's realign everything. Let's bring in the Watchman's Paradoxes, use this lesson to acquire a new skill. Incidentally, so I don't necessarily recommend this, and it's not because it's not well maintained, but I always sort of feel that the opportunity to try and get to grips with this stuff, you really only have that one chance to do that for yourself, and then afterwards it's, you're sort of left with whatever knowledge you've taken elsewhere. But there is a wiki that's maintained by the community called the Secret Histories Wiki, and it does a fairly good job of trying to, not just account for the different concepts inside of the Secret Histories setting, but like provide citations for the claims that it's making. So I don't go to it a whole lot because I feel that there's still a lot for me to engage with, and I want to take the time to do my own work before I go and I sort of see the other works. And it's not that I don't think that there's, I don't think you have to derive everything from first principles again, but I definitely feel that there's a lot more for me to take from these games on my own. But for those of you who do actually find this stuff sort of interesting, there is actually a community-maintained resource that does try to sort of combine all of the information together. So if you are interested in a particular character and maybe you don't, I mean, the thing is that this is time saving, right? Like sometimes you don't have a couple of, 100 hours to replay a game to get the exact set of circumstances that will give you the information on that thing you wanted to understand. Like that's a perfectly reasonable reason to to check out a website like that. Not that you need my permission to check out certain sites, but it did occur to me I should have actually mentioned that, just because I can imagine not everybody's going to want to go between the Weather Factory Twitter account and WFCat on their website and Cultist Simulator and Book of Hours and spend the time trying to figure out what the gods from nowhere are, let alone who the mayor in the tree is. But I feel like some people might be interested enough in seeing these things to want to go to a wiki and learn a little bit more. And obviously that's an opportunity for more people to gain an even deeper understanding of the game. But I will always advocate for people taking a chance to learn a little bit more about the game on their own account. And that's just so that you can offer your own perspectives, because in the end, somebody has to be writing these wikis, and perhaps you will be someone who contributes something to them on your own. All right, the Regensburg Room. The physician Natan lived here in the 15th century, and his family after that, tolerated by the monks until Henry dissolved the foundation and granted the isle to Hendrik. Hendrik turfed them out of the tower and furnished the place more to his own taste, but when Christopher Olopoli moved in 400 years later, he restored what he could. Olopoli wrote at the time of his sympathy as a rootless foundling for the outcast Natan, "I don't know what I am, but I don't think I'm English." So we'll have a bag that we can, actually we can put that in our inventory. We can open. I have a feeling that I'm going to want to catalog more than I'm going to want to open items, but we'll see how the day goes. We're slowly improving our skills. And I know, again, I know for sure that I've got at least one text whenever I want it, but the weather's probably going to be deciding how much we can do. Watchman's Paradoxes, that amber preserves and is preserved by light, that to hatch is not to die, that the sun. There is a place behind the world called the Mansus. Deeds that would be impossible in the world are inevitable there. The watchman, who knows all the ways of the Mansus, also knows how to make these deeds possible in the waking world. So that's an illumination and a Nyctodromy. Certainly doesn't hurt to look. Now, we've already occupied Nyctodromy, so this is a little harder to make a decision on, but this is also appealing because of its FOST. So this is one where these are probably the hardest ones for me to work out in terms of the Tree of Wisdoms, because ultimately what I've got here, from light, our dreams are shadows cast by the watchman's light, so we perceive him even in our shadow. This is illumination. Now we don't know what the text would be for Nyctodromy, so it may be that there's something I'm a little more interested in, and for that I would need to wait for level up. But this does give me a FOSS, so this would be an example where it's not something obviously bad, and so I would, at least for me, I really like the Watchman, even though I am playing the artist, so I probably should be, probably should be focusing a little bit more on artist-oriented things. But this is one of the harder ones because necessarily there is an absence of information unless I level this thing up, and so, you know, it depends on what I want to try and do. I don't think we have a lot of lantern opportunity. Actually, no, that's not true, because we could explore the house on the second floor. And given that revelation, I believe, yeah, we can get revelation from... Was it Stolen Reflections? Pretty sure it was Stolen Reflections. But anyways, given that we do have access to a revelation, we can actually get Reverend Timothy to open this room. So this is going to be more than likely something that I commit to the Tree of Wisdoms. The question is just when I do so. Now, I didn't realize that I was 10 minutes past, so it is 2 longer episodes today. Again, I apologize. I will try and get these things in at a proper amount of time. But I am going to call it for the episode here. We'll find out what the weather is tomorrow. I believe it is the first day of winter, and so we may wind up with some seasons which are a little more helpful for getting us higher in the long tower anyway. But all of that will happen tomorrow. Have a good night. See you in the next one.